The Sharp family lived in Victoria, Australia, a place known for its peaceful beaches and quiet suburban life. John Sharp, his pregnant wife Anna, and their adorable daughter Gracie appeared to be a happy family. However, this image was soon shattered, leading to one of the most heartbreaking cases in Australian history. In March 2004, the Sharp family home became a crime scene when Anna Kemp and her daughter, Gracie, vanished without a trace. Born on February 28, 1967, John Sharp grew up in a world familiar to many. His childhood was marked by the usual ups and downs, with aspirations shaped by the world around him and a pursuit of happiness supported by his family. Raised in a close-knit community where neighbors knew each other by name and children played freely in the sun, John's formative years seemed filled with simple joys. As he transitioned into adolescence, those who knew him observed his transformation from a bright-eyed child into a quiet, somewhat introverted young man, intelligent, courteous, yet always on the periphery, as if observing the world from a distance. John was always present but somehow apart. It was as if he was searching for something he couldn't quite find among the people around him. During these formative years, John's path subtly began to diverge, laying the foundation for the man he would become. His silent observations and the unspoken thoughts simmering beneath a calm exterior might have been early signs of a brewing storm. Anna Kemp, originally from New Zealand, brought with her the promise of new beginnings when she arrived in Australia. Her infectious smile and love of life touched everyone around her, including John Sharp. They met at the Commonwealth Bank of Australia where they both worked. Anna was 4 years John's senior. Laughter shared over coffee and long walks along the beach culminated in their wedding day. Anna's spirit was a stark contrast to John's quiet introspection, yet their paths were destined to intertwine, igniting a tragic sequence of events. Maybe it was the allure of opposites attracting that drew them together, or perhaps something deeper, a shared longing for connection, for being understood. They married in October 1994 and lived in various places around the Mornington Peninsula area of South Melbourne. The future seemed bright, filled with endless possibilities. But behind the joys of marriage, the initial signs of strain began to emerge. The arrival of a child brings a new dawn for a family. Gracie, born in August 2002, with her innocent eyes and radiant smile, became the center of John and Anna's world. Yet the joy of parenthood also brought new challenges, casting long shadows on their peaceful family life. Every home holds its secrets, its private sorrows, and silent battles. For John and Anna, the dream of a happy family life in the suburbs of the Mornington Peninsula soon faced trials that tested their bond. Gracie was diagnosed with hip dysplasia, requiring a corrective orthopedic harness and causing her endless discomfort. Her early months were marked by relentless crying and sleepless nights, a situation that tested her parents to their limits. Once the harness was removed, problems with eating began and her sleep issues persisted. Anna sought professional help for these challenges. The family relocated one last time to a residence on Prince Street in Mornington, a quiet coastal town about 35 miles south of Melbourne. This place would tragically become the final setting for Anna and Gracie. In November 2003, Anna became pregnant with their second child. Gracie was just 15 months old. Anna was very excited. She was a loving mother, and Gracie was what she was living for. She'd always wanted more than one child because she never wanted her daughter to be on her own, so that when she and her husband were no longer there, Gracie would have somebody. The facade of family harmony lasted until March 21st, 2004 at a nephew's birthday celebration, the last time when Anna was seen alive. Guests saw no signs of discord between Anna and her caring husband, John. The next day, Anna dropped Gracie off at daycare and arranged to catch up with a friend. Her final contact with someone outside her marriage occurred the day after during a call to her private health insurance company, where she discussed extending their health cover to include their expected child. Then John called Anna's friends to tell them she had left with another man and had left Gracie with him. He reached out to Anna's mother, claiming she had abandoned him for another man, and he was unaware of her whereabouts. Though he anticipated she would return for their daughter within the week, he kept bringing Gracie to her daycare, telling the staff that he and his wife had parted ways. which meant Gracie wouldn't be coming back to the daycare. Anna's family received emails from Anna, and her mother received a bouquet of flowers from her daughter, but no phone call. The initial shock and confusion of Anna's friends and family quickly turned to worry. How could a devoted mother and her child simply disappear without a word? By May 2004, Sharp, engaging with the media, painted a picture of a man tormented by his family's disappearance. He said to the local paper, "Anyone that knows me knows I gave 100% for my daughter and my marriage." In a public plea, Sharp, holding a photo of Gracie, professed enduring love for Anna, saying, "Anna, our marriage may be over, but I still love you, and you are the mother of our beautiful daughter, Gracie, whom we both adore more than anyone else." He claimed he had spoken to Anna a week earlier and that she had left him for another man. He asked anyone with information to come forward. He said, "My biggest fear is being denied a part of Gracie's future." His demeanor and statements, however, seemed odd and struck a discordant note, inviting scrutiny over his narrative's authenticity. Despite proclaiming their marital dissolution and inconsistency highlighted by his premature use of the past tense when speaking about his family, a detail that did not escape police notice. Behind the scenes, law enforcement began to peel back the layers of John Sharp's carefully constructed narrative. Each unanswered question pointed to a darker reality. What secrets lay buried within the Sharp family? Anna and her mother used to call each other every couple of days. When Anna missed several of her calls, she grew concerned. She called Sharp, who justified Anna's weak explanations like being busy taking Gracie to daycare. This made her even more worried. Anna's devout Catholic beliefs and her unlikely affair and abandonment initially without Gracie, and at 20 weeks pregnant, fueled her family's distrust toward Sharp's account, further aggravated by the impersonal email and gift without any phone contact. Upon Anna's continued absence, her mother alerted the police in New Zealand and reported her daughter missing, prompting communication with the Mornington authorities. Confronted by the police, Sharp told them Anna got into a blue car and relocated to Chelsea with their daughter, denying any knowledge or involvement into their disappearance. The search for Anna and Gracie commenced with urgency. Missing persons officer Noor Fraser said detectives had to keep an open mind and not assume the mother and daughter were dead, as they had only been reported missing. She said Anna's bank account had been used intermittently and her phone was used once or twice. "We kept thinking, is she alive?" But as days passed, hope began to fade, replaced by a gnawing realization that the answers they sought might reveal a truth too painful to bear. Sharp quickly became the main suspect since there was no evidence to support his statement. The investigation's pace quickened as new information surfaced. Friends and acquaintances came forward, their testimonies shedding light on the growing tensions behind the closed doors of the Sharps' home. One of the friends confessed she mentioned they were going through a tough time. "I never imagined it could lead to this." The investigators increased pressure on Sharp, trying to make him nervous so that he would make a mistake. He lived like a recluse and never had guests. Their family home was ominously quiet. John was followed by undercover officers to monitor his movements. Soon, there was a breakthrough in the case. To mislead investigators, Sharp periodically utilized Emma's phone and bank card, crafting an illusion of her active presence across the southeast suburbs of Victoria. However, this charade crumbled under police surveillance, capturing Sharp's attempts to conceal evidence. The surveillance caught him on camera driving to Chelsea Beach and pulling a white plastic bag from the bush next to the public toilet. He took out Anna's phone from the bag and made a call. Then he withdrew some cash from the nearest ATM. After that, he disposed of the bag with the phone and card by putting them into a trash can in Mount Martha. He then drove home and called the missing persons unit, telling them that his wife had just called him and withdrawn cash from their joint account. But the team already knew exactly what had happened. The evidence was irrefutable, pointing to a conclusion that was unthinkable. Not having enough evidence to charge Sharp with murders and being unable to determine his motive, the investigators hoped that he could lead them to the bodies. But as days passed with no action from Sharp, the decision to arrest him was made. On June 10th, Sharp faced another round of questioning by the authorities. He persisted that Anna had willingly departed on March 23rd. However, the investigators remained skeptical, noting his emotional detachment regarding his wife's supposed affair and subsequent departure with their daughter. Discrepancies in Sharp's timeline emerge. The man who claimed ignorance now appears as a master of evasion. Norelle Fraser said about Sharp, "I don't think anybody would know how John felt about anything. He was a closed book. He was very insular. He was a loner. He didn't show any emotion. He showed no personality." The investigators thought of another way to get his confession. They invited his parents and showed them the footage of John on Chelsea Beach and then asked them to talk to their son. It is the presentation of an undeniable piece of evidence that marks the turning point in the investigation. An hour after his parents left, John began to talk as he realized the inevitability of his situation. His final barriers of denial and self-preservation eroded, revealing the truth of his psyche, a man ensnared by his own darkest impulses. What turned his heart so cold that he became a stranger even to those who thought they knew him best? Sometimes the greatest dangers lurk in the places we expect the least. Sharp's confession laid bare the reality of what transpired within the walls of the Sharp home. He told police he had fantasies of murdering his wife for several months before ultimately killing her. Adjusting to life with a baby, sleepless nights, financial pressures, and the routine of daily life added layers of complexity, pushing the family to a breaking point. Sharp explained that he killed Anna because she was controlling and moody and was getting on his nerves. Their marriage was unhappy. Sharp perceived his wife's assertive personality as undermining his masculinity. He stated Anna used to wear the pants in the family. Sharp told the investigators that Anna's pregnancy was a surprise to him. He didn't want another child and viewed the new pregnancy as an additional burden, harboring resentment towards Anna and their unborn child in silence instead of voicing his concerns. He even questioned if it was his child at all. John was self-employed as a conveyancer. The financial responsibility of a growing family overwhelmed him. He seemed withdrawn. Anna was trying to bridge the growing distance between them. But as she reached out, John's retreat into himself became more pronounced. With each passing day, John became more distant, a prisoner of his own mind, ensnared by thoughts he could not share and feelings he could not express. Anna thought to keep her family together, unaware of the darkness taking hold of her husband's heart. The chasm between John isolated in his thoughts and Anna attending to the needs of their home and children widened, filled with unsaid words and unacknowledged fears. Anna found herself facing a wall of silence, her efforts met with indifference or worse, hostility. Sharp made an unexpected and ominous purchase in early 2003, a high-powered spear gun from a Sport Philip Marine in Mornington, an interest he had never before expressed. This marked the beginning of a dark and tragic chapter. Sharp dedicated countless hours to mastering the spear gun in their backyard, familiarizing himself with its mechanics. In the days that followed, a domestic dispute escalated into an unimaginable horror. Gerald Kemp, Anna's brother, told reporters that in February 2004, Anna had an ultrasound to determine their baby's gender, but Sharp did not even bother going to the doctor's appointment with her. Upon her return, she anticipated her husband's eagerness to learn about the baby's gender only to find he showed no interest and didn't even ask her. Distressed by his apathy, Anna confronted Sharp, warning him that if he continued to be the unborn child, she was going to leave him. They went to bed at around 9 or 10 p.m. Anna quickly fell asleep while John stayed awake, consumed by their argument and the overall dissatisfaction with their marriage. Eventually, he stepped out to the backyard garage, retrieving the spear gun that he didn't use outside of his target practice sessions. In a chilling sequence of events, Sharp crept back into the room where Anna was sleeping peacefully, coldly aiming a charged spear gun at her while their 20-month-old daughter lay asleep in her bed. The first shot did not end her life as she was still breathing, and with a grim resolve, he reloaded and fired again, this time fatally wounding Anna and the unborn child she carried. Afterward, he covered her with towels and retreated to sleep the rest of the night on the sofa downstairs. The next morning, Sharp tried to remove the spears, but managed to remove only the shafts. Completing this grim task, he then dropped off Gracie at her daycare, later turning away a TV antenna technician booked by Anna with the excuse of Anna's absence, her body still in the bedroom. Under the cover of night, He buried Anna in a hastily dug shallow grave in the garden. Officer Fraser said, "It's almost difficult to describe, but to hear a man talk about murdering his wife who was 3 months pregnant, that was hard enough, but he said it with no emotion whatsoever." She compared his confession to saying what he'd had for breakfast that morning. In the days that followed, Sharp took Gracie and revisited the marine supply store for another spear. He said, "I was thinking of taking care of Gracie by myself, and just amongst all this madness, that's when I lost the plot." When asked why he killed Gracie, he said, "I don't really know," and called it irrational madness. Sharp told the police, "You know what you're doing is sort of insane, but there's just this weird part of you that's almost unstoppable or something. You're almost like an automatic pilot sort of thing. I can't really remember much of what I thought of anything, just apart from the sort of crazy sensation. It was totally emotional." He said that for the next 4 days, voices in his head debated Gracie's fate. A few days after the murder, he started thinking Gracie needed to be with her mom. "It was sort of in and out of my head all week. I could hear things going through my head. The voices saying, 'You can't do it. You can do it. You've got to do it.' Every option was coming up." On March 27th, after putting Gracie into her cot, Sharp drank a few glasses of whiskey and cola, confessing that he did this to numb his senses for what he was about to do. Then he went to the garage. Armed once again with the spear gun, he inflicted unimaginable terror on Gracie, who endured multiple shots before her tragic death at her father's hands. Same as Anna, Gracie didn't die at once. After the 4th shot, she was dead. The next morning, Sharp returned to Gracie's bedroom. He could not bear looking at her, so he had to hold a towel in front of his face. Then he removed the bolts. Concluding his macabre errands, Sharp acquired a chainsaw at a local Bunnings Warehouse hardware store in Frankston. He unearthed Anna's remains from their garden. He'd undisposed of Anna's and Gracie's bodies in garbage bags at the Mornington Refuse Transfer Station. He also discarded the spear gun, the chainsaw, and Gracie's clothes and toys. "I have a bootload of hard waste," he told the attendant. Officer Fraser said, "This is his wife that's pregnant. I kept thinking what was coming next, and then he told us about little Gracie. It's the most difficult interview I have ever listened to. I remember at one stage there was a break in the interview. I went to the ladies' toilets and I just put my head in my hands. Couldn't listen." Sharp then called Anna's friends and family with a fabricated story of her affair. Her friends said that immediately, alarm bells rang, and her hairs on the back of her neck stood up because there was no way Anna would leave Gracie behind. Following the murder of his daughter, he made a second call to his mother-in-law telling her that Gracie was now with Anna in a bigger and better place. At his residence, Sharp crafted an email from Anna to her family in New Zealand to convince them she was fine. The messages didn't sound like her daughter had written them. Sharp used Anna's email account to contact her brother as well. In the email, he claimed she had only intensified the mystery surrounding Anna's prolonged silence. The family filed a missing person report on Anna. The interview uncovered that he had jotted down notes for his cover story. While analyzing Sharp's TV appearances, body language expert Dr. Cliff Lamsley said that this was a poor attempt at portraying concern and sadness. He was juggling his eyebrows, contorting his face, and using a tissue as a prop. Though there was no moisture on his nose, no tears on his face. It's a convincing tactic that we rarely see with truth-tellers. The family told the police some disturbing facts. They believed Sharp's motive for murdering Anna was her discovery of Gracie's abuse by her husband. History of abusing the children of family and friends. Anna didn't know this before marrying him. One relative said, "We reckon she caught him. We think that's why he killed her." When one of Sharp's former victims became an adult, she confronted him about the abuse. In response, Sharp called her a derogatory name and told her she deserved it. The victim was tormented by the thought that reporting it earlier could have prevented the murders. Anna's brother later said that after the couple's honeymoon, she told her mother about their marriage. "I think I've made a mistake." Her brother remarked she just carried on with the mistake. She said there was no passion or love. Nevertheless, the couple continued their life together. An exhaustive 3-week search at a landfill in Mornington eventually led to the discovery of both Anna and Gracie's remains. Norelle Fraser was a member of Victoria Police for almost 30 years. One case she will never forget is the Mornington Monster. During the search, she spotted a blue bag. She opened it but saw a kitchen glove, so the search continued. However, she had a gut feeling that something was wrong, so she returned to the bag. She then realized that the glove was not what it seemed. She said, "It's funny, but I knew I'd find Anna. Just an innate feeling I can't describe any better than that. And when I did find her, I couldn't leave her. I sat with the bag waiting for crime scene to arrive. I couldn't bear the thought of her being alone in the tip without anyone with her. I've thought about it since, and I know it sounds bizarre, but I almost feel like Anna was reaching out to me. I was determined to make sure that Anna wouldn't end her life in this tip. I just knew I would find her, and I did." Soon, she realized that Gracie must be close by. "I put my head in my hands, and I just cried. I cried for what Anna had endured, for Anna's family, for humanity as a whole, I suppose." They were laid to rest at Green Park Cemetery in New Zealand with Anna's maiden name, Kemp, marking their final resting place. The memorial also bears the name of Anna's unborn son, Francis. During the trial, the attorney aimed to shed light on John Sharp's psyche, his mental anguish that preceded the tragic events. Through the defense's lens, Sharp's life was depicted as being full of mounting pressures, financial strain, marital discord, and a crippling sense of entrapment. The sentencing judge said the events of the crime were too awful to contemplate and singular in its barbarity. He stated that Sharp had murdered his daughter simply so that his first crime would not be discovered, which was unspeakably callous. Forensic psychologist Carrie Dane said, "John Sharp was a quiet man, a shy man. Another way of looking at this was that he was actually quite socially inept. He didn't have much in the way of communication skills. He didn't have a lot of emotional intelligence." Psychiatrist Dr. Lester Walton had described Sharp as dependent, passive, and the retiring individual who was unable or reluctant to confront problems. Sharp believed the only way of solving his marriage difficulties was to kill his wife. The Mornington Monster pleaded guilty to the murders committed against both Emma and Gracie, receiving 2 consecutive terms of life imprisonment for each without eligibility for parole before 33 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2037. Sharp wept like a baby on hearing the verdict. He is kept under protective custody while serving his sentence as he faces life threats from other inmates. Sharp's elderly parents said John's crimes were horrific. He has given himself a life sentence for what he has done, and he will live with this for the rest of his life. One of Sharp's nieces said that his crimes have stolen 3 beautiful and precious lives. Sharp's crime is considered Victoria's worst case of familicide. Investigator Shane Brendel said, "It's a healing process for us as much as anyone else. As time passes, it becomes a bit easier. However, it also deepens your appreciation for your own circumstances and family, reminding you to cherish every moment spent with them. The awareness that some people resort to extreme measures to harm their own families highlights just how special and important your own family truly is." Every relationship is built on the foundation of trust, whether between parents and children, husband and wife, or even boyfriend and girlfriend. When trust is broken in these crucial relationships, and negative thoughts arise, it can feel devastating. Today's case shares a similar theme, involving a boy and a girl from Pakistan who were very happy in their relationship. However, after some time, the girl decided to break up, as she began seeing a negative side to her boyfriend. What the boy did afterward shocked all of Pakistan. Countess Ali Mukadam was not just an ordinary citizen of Pakistan, but also a diplomat and ambassador. Due to his role, he lived in various countries. In 2021, he was residing in Islamabad, Pakistan. Countess Ali had also served as Pakistan's ambassador to South Korea and Kazakhstan, holding a prestigious position in the country. There were a total of 5 people in his family, including Shalkid Mukadam, his wife Kausar Mukadam, 2 daughters and 1 son. October 23, 1993 was the day when a beautiful girl was born in Shulkat Ali's house, whom they named Noor. Noor was a healthy and cute baby who always laughed and never bothered anyone too much. Although Shalkat's professional life was very busy and stressful, but when he came home, He spent quality time with his family. As a result, his children had a very good upbringing. From school days, Noor had a great interest in studying. She always used to read either school books or other books. Now, because Raymond Mukadam was a diplomat, he used to get transferred to other countries due to his work, which is why Noor started her schooling from Ireland. Then she completed high school from South Korea. After South Korea, the family moved to Kazakhstan. But Noor thinks about completing her college in the US, where her older sister Sarah also lived. However, after the US, Noor returned to Pakistan, Islamabad. As humble and smart as Noor was in her childhood, she was equally humble and smart in her adult years. That's why everyone at home trusted Noor and easily accepted her decisions. Besides, Noor loved animals, especially stray dogs and cats. She used to feed them whenever she had time. Although Noor belonged to a wealthy family, she never had a liking for materialistic things. By hearing all these things, you must have understood that Noor was a kind-hearted, down-to-earth, intelligent, and confident girl. Along with all these things, Noor also had a great passion for art and calligraphy. She often made religious paintings too. As I mentioned, coming from a wealthy diplomat family, parties were a common occurrence at the diplomats' homes. So Raymond Mukadam often took his family to such parties because they were excellent for networking and building connections. It was at one such party in 2018 that Noor met a boy named Zahir Jaffer. Zahir and Noor are both going to be key characters in this case. So before we proceed, let's take a brief look at Zahir's background. Zahir Jaffer was born in the USA, but he spent his childhood and teenage years in Pakistan. After that, Zahir pursued his graduation in the US and also spent some time living in the UK. Zahir's father was Zakir Jaffer, who was a very successful businessman. Due to his father's business ventures, the family was one of the wealthiest families in Pakistan. The Jaffer family had various businesses including healthcare, oil, real estate, and construction. This also provided them with opportunities to work with their country's military. One of these companies is Ahmed Jaffer and Company, where Zahir Jaffer is now the CEO while his father, Zakir Jaffer, used to oversee the company. But after some time, Zahir's mood changed and he started working as a therapist at a company called Therapy Works. In this company, Zahir used to listen to the children of the school and explain to them about mental health care. He also used to arrange lectures and presentations for the children. But the shocking thing here is that Zahir himself was an introverted and angry since childhood. He also had very few friends, and he rarely attended parties with them. But it is at one such party that he meets Noor, and he likes her. And Noor also enjoys talking to Zahir. Perhaps this happened because their personalities were different, and people say that opposite personalities are attracted to each other. However, both their families already knew each other because they used to attend such parties. But friendship between Noor and Zahir developed from this party. Then, after some time, this friendship turned into love and they both entered into a romantic relationship. However, it's not like they kept this fact hidden from their parents or friends. Rather, both their families and friends knew that Zahir and Noor were dating. Both families were happy because Noor completes Zahir and Zahir completes Noor. Actually, Noor brought out a side of Zahir that no one had seen before, whereas Zahir used to be very introverted before. But as soon as he met Noor, his personality began to change gradually. He started enjoying his life, hanging out with people. And at one party, people were surprised to see Zahir dancing with Noor, including Zahir's family, because they had never thought they would see this side of Zahir's personality. Everything was going well, but as the relationship grew older, things started to deteriorate. Initially, everything was going well in the relationship. Both were enjoying themselves and their families were also very happy. But then, after some time, a different side of Zahir came out in front of Noor. Actually, Noor later finds out that Zahir is a very aggressive and abusive man. Allegedly, Zahir had physically and mentally abused Noor several times. Not only that, Zahir had also raised his hand against his own mother before. As a result, after almost 3 years of relationship, when Noor couldn't bear Zahir anymore, she broke up with him at the beginning of 2021. In both families, there was dissatisfaction over their children ending the relationship because neither of them was a normal family. And in such affluent households, It's not typical for a boy and a girl to enter a relationship, break up shortly after, and then enter into a relationship with someone else later. In fact, people like them also see relationships as a business. Like most wealthy families, they marry off their sons or daughters where they can profit. But besides that, Zahir was also displeased that Noor left him, and now he took it as an affront to his male ego. However, after some time, Zahir also started thinking about moving on, and then he thought he would go back to the US and settle there because he also had US citizenship along with Pakistani citizenship. Now let's jump to July 18th, 2021. On this day, Zahir booked a taxi to go to Islamabad International Airport. Actually, according to Pakistan Standard Time, Zahir's flight to New York was at 3:50 a.m. on July 19th. He had already packed his bags and informed his family about it. But before leaving, he wanted to meet Noor just once, so he called Noor on the evening of July 18th. At that time, Noor was at her home preparing for Eid with her family. Now Zahir called Noor and requested, "I am leaving this country for New York, and I will never come back here again. But I will settle in the US, so please meet me once before I leave." Additionally, Zahir told Noora, "Come to my house. We'll meet, and then when I leave for the airport from my house, I'll drop you off at your home first." Although these two had already broken up, before that they had been in a relationship for 3 years, which led Noor to say yes to meeting Zahir. After that, at 9:05 p.m., Noor leaves her house. But she doesn't tell her family that she's going to Zahir's house. She just says she's going to her friend's house and will be back soon. Around 10 p.m., Noor arrives outside Zahir's house at the scent location in Sector F74. But strange things start happening from here. Now, as I told you, Zahir's flight was at 3:50 a.m., but between 10 and 11 p.m., Zahir calls his travel agency multiple times. Zahir called his travel agency and started asking them very strange questions like, "What would happen if I don't board this flight? Will I get my refund back? If I decide to book tickets again after 10 days, what will happen?" Sometime later, Zahir called his travel agency again and said that now I'm not canceling my ticket, but I've decided to go to the US on this flight. But let me tell you, during this time, Noor was inside his house with him. But for her, this house was a new place because she had never been here before. Afterward, the taxi that Zahir had booked to go to the airport also arrives outside Jathra's house at exactly 11 p.m. However, Zahir doesn't come out of the house for half an hour. Meanwhile, the taxi driver called Zahir 2 or 3 times, but Zahir told him to wait, saying, "I'll be there in just 5 minutes." However, at 12:07 a.m., he calls the taxi driver again and says, "My plan to go to the airport is cancelled now. Anyway, if we leave for the airport now, I won't be able to catch my flight." Despite waiting for more than an hour, Zahir pays the taxi driver half the fare. Actually, Zahir had booked this taxi for 2,000 Pakistani rupees. Now after that, the taxi driver leaves from there. But at 1:40 a.m., Zahir calls the taxi driver again and asks him to come back to his house. Now the taxi driver also returns to Zahir's house because he knew he would get the full payment. But this time too, Zahir made the taxi driver wait outside the house for a few minutes. And then at 2:15 a.m., Zahir comes out with his luggage. But the strange thing this time was that Noor was also with him, and she didn't have sandals on her feet, which the driver found very strange. However, what struck him as even strange was that Zahir was talking to Noor during the car ride, but Noor wasn't responding to his words. Although the driver didn't pay much attention to this at the time, halfway through, Zahir told the driver, "Now take the car back towards home anyway. We're already very late. I don't think we'll make it to the airport on time and catch the flight." After that, the taxi driver drops them off again at Jaffar's house at 2:35 a.m. But as soon as Noor got out of the taxi, Zahir pulled her inside the house. According to the taxi driver's statement, he felt like Noor wasn't supposed to go back inside the house with Zahir, but Zahir forcefully took her inside. Then on July 19th, Noor stayed at Zahir's house the whole day, and then July 20th arrived, which was the day of Eid. Noor had come to Zahir's house to meet him on July 18th at 9:05 p.m. But now it had been more than 24 hours, and Noor's father and mother had returned home after shopping for Eid. But when they find out that their daughter has been missing from home for 24 hours at 12:57 a.m. on July 20th, Showkat Mukadam texts his daughter asking her where she is. However, Noor doesn't reply to that text message. Then at 5:48 a.m., Noor's mother messages her, and two family friends also call Noor. Yet there is no response from Noor. This causes worry for Noor's parents, and they were about to inform the police about it. But at 10:43 a.m., Noor sends a voice recording to her mother. However, the contents of that recording were never made public, but it was the last time Noor's mother, Kosar Mukadam, heard her daughter's voice. But after sending the voice message, another strange thing happens. Zahir immediately calls Noor's mother from his own phone and tells her that Noor is not at his house, trying to prove that he hasn't even seen Noor. Then from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. that same day, Zahir repeatedly calls his father, Zakir Jaffer. However, at around 7:10 p.m., Noor is seen on CCTV cameras. But by that time, her condition was very bad, and it seemed as though Zahir had tortured her severely. In the CCTV footage, Noor is seen jumping from the balcony of Zahir's house on the first floor and falling directly onto an iron grill. This caused her to sustain an injury to her abdomen, which is why she is seen holding her stomach in this clip. She was actually distressed by Zahir's harassment and wanted to leave the house. However, the security guard closed the gate, and meanwhile, Zahir also jumps from the balcony to catch Noor and brings her back inside. But as he was bringing her back, Noor falls down, but Zahir drags her inside. Now I should tell you that it wasn't just Zahir and Noor inside the house. There was also a security guard, a cook, and a gardener, but none of them helped Noor. In fact, from July 18th to July 20th, Noor attempted to escape from this house 6 times. But each time, one of Zahir's servants informed him, and Noor was always caught. But this time, because of Noor's attempt to escape, Zahir becomes very angry. After bringing Noor back inside, he calls his father once again around 7:30 p.m. But since then, Zahir didn't call anyone for 30 minutes because in the meantime, Zahir first attempts to shoot Noor with his handgun. But as soon as he presses the trigger, his gun jams. However, even after that, Zahir doesn't stop wanting to kill Noor. It was already in his mind. So he takes out a Swiss knife and starts stabbing every part of Noor's body. Meanwhile, Noor scratches Zahir's face and arms with her nails. But after some time, Noor's condition deteriorates so much that she faints. Noor was unconscious, but even then, Zahir kept stabbing her with the knife. Afterward, he grabs Noor by the throat and keeps squeezing until Noor's last breath is gone. Later, Noor's post-mortem report reveals that she died due to lack of oxygen. But before killing Noor, Zahir ripped her several times. But Zahir didn't stop there. After Noor's death, he pulled out his knife and started cutting Noor's throat. And finally, he severed her head from her body. After killing Noor, Zahir quickly calls his father and friends saying, "Thieves have broken into our house and I need help." At the same time, some of Zahir's friends head towards his house. However, Zahir's father wasn't there. That's why he called the CEO of the company where Zahir worked named Therapy Works and said, "Quickly go to my house and save my son at any cost." In reality, Zahir's father, Zakir Jaffer, called the CEO of that company because they needed to erase all evidence of Noor's murder by going to Zahir. Moreover, the CEO of the company had to comply because Zahir's father was funding the company. Around 8:30 p.m., Tahir Zahour, the CEO of Therapy Works, arrives outside Zahir's house with his 6 employees. Additionally, some of Zahir's friends were also present. However, the door of Zahir's house remained closed, so Tahir took a ladder and with his employees, entered through the window on the first floor. But as soon as they reached the first floor, Zahir attacked one of the employees with a knife piercing through his chin and tongue. Zahir was extremely angry at that moment, so 5 to 6 people quickly grabbed him to control him. After this, Zahir's hands were tied behind his back and ropes were also tied around his feet. But as soon as the people went inside Zahir's room from the balcony, they were stunned. In fact, there was blood everywhere on the floor, even on the walls of the room. Then they saw Noor's body in the center of the room, but her head was 3 feet away from her body. Now everyone inside the room was astonished to regain control over Zahir and after seeing Noor's dead body. But in the meantime, the neighbors were also quite alert because when Zahir was being caught, he was screaming a lot, which made his neighbors call the police. After that, the police arrived there, and then on July 20th, around 10 o'clock at night, the police called Countess Mukadam to inform him that his daughter had been murdered. Hearing this sad news, Mukadam's family home was engulfed in mourning because their youngest and dearest daughter was no longer in this world. But Noor's family knew who had done all this, and now they wanted to punish Zahir. But now they were worried about how Zahir would confess his crime. But Zahir did something very strange here too. As soon as the police caught Zahir, he confessed in a short while that he was the one who had killed Noor, and he had done so because he loved Noor very much. He had even proposed marriage to Noor, but she had rejected his marriage proposal and later broke up with him. This hurt Zahir's ego, so he booked his and Noor's one-way tickets to New York for July 19th. But before this, Zahir had decided that if Noor agreed to go to New York with him, they would get married and settle in New York. But if Noor didn't agree, he would kill her. However, from July 18th to 20th, Zahir tried to convince Noor for marriage. But when Noor refused to marry him, Zahir finally assaulted her very brutally. Although all the servants in Zahir's house knew what Zahir did with Noor, none of them tried to stop him even once, not even daring to call the police because they were afraid that if they did, Zahir would not spare them. Now, even though Zahir had confessed his crime in front of the police, when the case went to court, he was behaving strangely in court. Firstly, he entered the court looking disheveled as if he hadn't bathed for days. Besides, he shouted loudly in the courtroom, even abusing the judge. Furthermore, the police had to drag him into the court and out of the court forcefully. However, he was doing all these things to prove that he is mentally unstable, and because of this, he should be spared from the death penalty for the murder of Noor. If it were proven that Zahir is mentally unstable, then firstly, his punishment would be reduced, and secondly, he would escape the death penalty. Actually, Zahir had schizophrenia, and he wanted to take advantage of it by telling the court that he is mentally unfit. Actually, schizophrenia is a serious mental illness in which a person is mostly lost in the world of imagination and knows very little about the real world. Because of this, he often behaves strangely. But when Zahir's medical examination was done, the report clearly stated that Zahir is mentally fit, and whatever he did with Noor, he did it consciously. But this made it clear that Zahir was an abuser and an aggressive person. Besides, there were many harassment cases against Zahir in both the US and Pakistan. In this case, during the ongoing trial in court, the entire Pakistan raised its voice for justice for Noor. Rallies and marches were held every day. As a result, on February 24, 2022, Noor received justice, and Zahir was sentenced to 2 death penalties, one for physically assaulting Noor and the other for her murder. Additionally, his 2 house staff, Iftikhar and Muhammad Khan, were also sentenced to 10 years in jail. Looking at the photos, you wouldn't know much, but Zahir was a powerful, tall, and aggressive man with whom a sweet and innocent girl, Noor, spent almost 48 hours. And those 48 hours were nothing less than hell for her. So with this, the Noor Mukadam murder case comes to an end right here. Anna Mary Barnett of Radcliffe, Kentucky was just a teenager when she became a mother. As much as she loved her son, Jerry, she struggled to support him. In order to be able to provide for, she generally relied on family members to look after her son while she was at work. One day in 1965, however, Anna Mary could not find a relative to watch 5-year-old Cherry. She therefore had to leave him with a babysitter while she was at work. She did not know the babysitter, who lived in nearby Elizabethtown, very well, but she did not have any other childcare option that day. However, when Anna Mary returned to pick up her son, both Jerry and the babysitter were gone. Neighbors of the babysitter told Anna Mary that she had simply packed up and left. Anna Mary and her family tried to get assistance from local law enforcement agencies but were turned away. The only reasons they could think of for their refusal to investigate the case were Anna Mary's race or age. Whatever the authorities' reasons were for not taking Jerry's disappearance seriously, Anna Mary was more scared after asking them for help than she was when she first went to see them. The babysitter took Jerry to Delaware, where she then abandoned him. Authorities there did not have any records on him, and he was too young to provide them with specific details about his family or where they lived. Jerry was given the last name of Thomas and an estimated birth date and placed into foster care. Jerry grew up and eventually had children of his own. However, by his own admission, he sometimes found it challenging to be active in their lives because of the trauma he had experienced in foster care and the way it negatively influenced his understanding of the concept of family. It would be one of his children who would ultimately help reunite Jerry with his family and begin to heal that damage. In 2016, Jerry's son, Damon Parker, took a commercial DNA test. In early 2020, a new DNA match showed up in the system. That match was his cousin in Kentucky, Will Barnett. Will was able to explain to Damon the details of Jerry's background and the story of how he was taken from his family. Damon was then able to speak to his grandmother, Anna Mary, and arrange a reunion. In February of 2020, Damon and Jerry made the 10-hour drive from Delaware to Radcliffe. Outside of his mother's home, Jerry was met by a large group of emotional family members. After 55 years, he was finally reunited with his mother. Anna Mary knew he was really her son as soon as she saw him and was beside herself with joy at finally having him back in her life. The entire family is grateful to have Jerry back and finally relieved the stress and concern they have carried for so many years. Jerry says the reunion and the joy his family has shown over it has filled a void that he always felt during his time apart from them. Raymond Nelson was born on September 1, 1911 in Iowa and grew up in the city of Logan. He graduated from Logan High School in 1931 and worked as a clerk at the Logan Canty drugstore. In 1934, he married Helen Smith and the couple would eventually have 2 daughters, Roberta and Claudia. On December 3, 1940, Raymond dropped off his laundry at his parents' home in Logan. His sister reported that he had tears in his eyes while he was there. This would be the last time anyone in his family would see him. His youngest daughter was just 4 months old at the time. Shortly after Raymond went missing, a truck driver named J.A. Peterson came forward. Peterson said that he had given Raymond a ride to Council Bluffs on the night of December 3rd. Raymond had told him that he was on his way to Omaha where he was due to report to work at the airport the following morning. Police went to Omaha to look for Raymond there but found no evidence that he had arrived in the city. They believed that this meant Raymond either had met with foul play or had traveled further west. The FBI became involved in Raymond's disappearance after his draft number was called up, and he did not report for duty. They could not locate him and he was declared a draft dodger. Raymond's social security number was never used after he went missing. There were certain details that made it appear Raymond may have voluntarily disappeared. He stopped paying many of his bills, including the one for his life insurance, shortly before he went missing. However, some members of his family were still convinced that something terrible had happened to him. His mother, Millie, remained positive that her son was not the kind of man who would have walked out on his family until her dying day. Raymond's oldest daughter, Roberta, found comfort in the idea that something had happened to her father than in the notion that he had willingly abandoned their family. Raymond's younger daughter, Claudia, eventually had a daughter of her own, Jennifer Hoffman, who would be the driving force behind finally solving Raymond's case. Jennifer grew up hearing stories about her lost grandfather, and after she became a private investigator, she began looking into the case with hopes of finally being able to tell her mother what really happened to Raymond. Jennifer, of course, used the basic investigative techniques, collecting documents and speaking to witnesses, in this case her relatives. She tried more creative methods as well. Raymond loved model airplanes and was highly skilled at constructing them. Some of his planes were featured in window displays at the Brandeis department store in downtown Omaha. Jennifer therefore began researching the model airplane community in case Raymond did leave Iowa voluntarily and continued his hobby elsewhere. During this research, she came across an image of an Australian man named Monty Tyrrell. Monty was a prominent enough member of the model airplane community that the Monty Tyrrell Memorial Scale Rally, held by the Peckham and District Aircraft Radio Control Society, is still put on every March, almost 30 years after his death. Jennifer believed that there was a striking resemblance between and her grandfather. She began trying to get in contact with individuals in Australia with information about Monty, but her early efforts were unsuccessful. She was eventually able to locate someone who had known Monty towards the end of his life. This person told her that Monty's father, Ned, had lived in South Australia and worked at the Tivoli Theatre in Adelaide. If this information was correct, it would mean that Monty was not really Raymond Nelson. However, Jennifer hired an Australian private investigator who learned that no one named Ned had worked at the Tivoli. Furthermore, he could not find any information about Monty for a 30-year period, which he found suspicious. By 2004, Monty Tyrrell was Jennifer's strongest theory, but she had no way to prove if he really had been her grandfather. The lack of resolution in the case would nag Jennifer for the next 16 years until she received a phone call that would close it. In the spring of 2020, a man named Mark Nelson was using Ancestry.com to research his family. When researching the life of his grandfather, Roy C. Nelson, he was unable to find any information about him from before 1940. It was as though Roy had not existed before that year. Roy's parents, Nels and Millie Nelson, were named in Roy's obituary, so Mark began researching them. He could find no mention of them having a son or living with anyone named Roy, but he did find record of their son, Raymond Nelson of Iowa. Raymond Nelson had the exact same date of birth as Roy Nelson. Mark's grandfather had claimed to be from Hibbing, Minnesota, and never used the name Raymond. Mark was not immediately concerned by these details. Perhaps his grandfather had been born in Minnesota and lived in Iowa later and disliked his given name, so he went by Roy instead. However, both Roy Nelson and Raymond Nelson had draft cards on file on Ancestry.com. Comparing the signatures on them, Mark noticed that the name Nelson had been signed almost identically. When Mark looked Raymond Nelson up online, he came across an article about his disappearance and Jennifer Huffman's quest to solve it. He got in contact with her and shared with her all of the information he had gathered. Jennifer agreed that the signatures on the draft cards appeared to have been signed by the same person, and photographs of Roy Nelson were strikingly similar to ones of Raymond. Further confirming that Roy really was Raymond was the DNA of Raymond's granddaughter, Gina, whose mother was Raymond's daughter Roberta. When Gina used a commercial DNA site, it matched her with a close cousin in Connecticut. The Nelson family could not figure out how this person fit into their family tree at the time. After learning about Roy Nelson, they discovered that this relative was a member of his family. Raymond had left Iowa on his own and moved to Connecticut, where he applied for a new social security number and changed his name to Roy. While living as Roy, Raymond had 4 more children. Raymond's reasons for leaving his family in Iowa will remain unknown, but they at least now know what became of him. It's kind of bittersweet, his daughter Claudia told the Daily Nonpareil, but I'm glad we finally know what happened. Vanessa Smallwood of Maple Shade, New Jersey, was a devout Christian who was passionate about sharing her faith with others. She loved her family, especially her 3 grown sons. She had a kind heart and a caring spirit. At the beginning of 2014, the 46-year-old was going through a difficult period. She was unhappy with her marriage and on disability from her job as a contractor at the Philadelphia International Airport. She had become sick after dealing with the stress of her mother's death and her father suffering multiple strokes. She did have a history of mental health issues, but a cousin who saw her on January 25th would later report that Vanessa had been speaking optimistically about her future. On January 27, 2014, Vanessa and her husband drove to the Any Garment Cleaners in the 500 block of Haddonfield Road in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Vanessa's husband went inside while she waited for him outside in their 2005 Chrysler Town and Country minivan. When he came back out, however, Vanessa and the vehicle were gone. Vanessa's cell phone pinged near Broad Street in Clayton, New Jersey, approximately 25 miles south of where she was last seen, at 10:22 a.m. on the day she went missing. This would be the only indication of where she went after leaving the dry cleaners. There was no activity on her credit cards or bank accounts, and authorities could not locate her vehicle. On January 16, 2020, divers from the Walker Diving Underwater Construction Company were clearing debris from the Salem River near the Port of Salem to ensure that the river was safe for shipping. During this process, they came across a badly mangled Chrysler van submerged underwater. The van was pulled from the river around noon that day, and human remains were found inside of it. They were later confirmed to be Vanessa Smallwood. Vanessa's exact cause of death has not been revealed, but Salem County Prosecutor John Linehan did announce that the medical examiner found no indications of foul play in the case. 6 years after Vanessa went missing, her family was finally able to lay her to rest. Lisa Maria Kaisa was born in 1994 into a large family with 8 siblings. It was a big family, but far from prosperous. Her parents were often preoccupied with their own issues, leaving little room for love or care for their children. There were also rumors of abuse and violence within the household. The tragic events in this story unfolded in 2020, at the height of the global battle against COVID-19. In a quiet corner of Ecuador, in the small parish of Pifo on the northeastern outskirts of Quito, a series of horrifying events took place unnoticed by many. This is where Lisa Maria Kaisa, a woman with an enigmatic gaze, was born and raised. Her life story soon turned into a true Ecuadorian nightmare. On Tuesday, October 27, 2020, Lisa sent several desperate messages to the father of her children, David. Their relationship was on the verge of collapsing. In these messages, Lisa expressed her love for him and shared the news of an unexpected new pregnancy. But as the conversation continued, Lisa wrote that her life was losing meaning and that she felt the decision to terminate the pregnancy was inevitable. She pleaded with David to come to her, but he refused, influenced by his parents' insistence that he stay home. By the early morning hours of October 28th, neighbors in Lisa's home heard a faint cry for help. When they looked out the window, they saw a woman lying on the floor, showing signs of vomiting. The neighbors quickly rushed to her aid, calling emergency services. When doctors and police arrived, they found Lisa in critical condition but still alive. After administering first aid, she was immediately hospitalized. However, inside the house, her children, a 5-year-old girl and a 9-year-old boy, were found unconscious. The doctors were unable to help them. Their little hearts had stopped beating at that point. Authorities learned the identity of the children's father and contacted David Acosta, who upon learning of the tragedy immediately arrived on the scene accompanied by his father. He was informed that Lisa was in the hospital and his children were found without signs of life. After several days of fighting for life in the hospital, Lisa finally regained consciousness. By that time, the investigators, guided by their findings, had presented the prosecutor's office with sufficiently convincing arguments to issue an arrest warrant for this mysterious woman. When she was released from the hospital, she was immediately transferred to a social rehabilitation center. The authorities insisted that Lisa undergo a psychological and psychiatric evaluation as her state of mind required further investigation as part of the upcoming trial. Lisa ended up in a rehabilitation center and doctors and psychologists took up their work. In a conversation with a criminal psychologist, Lisa opened up about her difficult childhood where her parents fought and abused each other and their children. Her childhood had a noticeable impact on her state of mind, and moments of quarrels and her parents' divorce became an integral part of her memories. Such a childhood forced Lisa to go to work from the age of 11 to be able to study. The girl strived to escape from her dysfunctional family and build her future in a different way. The expert report also indicated that Lisa had been abused. She talked about how after several years of marriage, David, her husband, changed dramatically. He began to humiliate his spouse and then to raise his hand against her. On the day of the tragedy with the children, investigators working at the scene found several glasses with liquid residue on the table. These finds later revealed traces of epilepsy pills belonging to one of the children, as well as other chemicals requiring identification. Police officers thoroughly searched the house and after noticing a strange odor in the kitchen, noticed a suspicious area under the utility room. They broke down the barrier and found a lifeless body wrapped in a blanket with characteristic signs of having been there for a long time. Later, further investigation revealed that the discovered body belonged to Jamie Yanchiguano, a 28-year-old who had been in contact with Lisa. Jamie had been reported missing by his family days before the gruesome discovery. According to Rosa Yanchiguano, Jamie's sister, he was last seen on October 18th. Rosa told investigators that after her brother disappeared, Lisa called several times inquiring about him. Lisa claimed to have received a text message from Jamie where he mentioned that illegal substance traffickers were holding him captive and demanding a ransom of $8,000. She strongly warned Jamie's family not to contact the police. This claim became a crucial point in a complex investigation as detectives sought to solve the tragedy and uncover if there were any other hidden victims. During her interrogation, Lisa revealed that in 2020, while working at a cookie factory, she met Jamie Ianchiguano. According to her, they became friends. Lisa wanted to return to her husband, who allegedly planned to blackmail Jamie for money. David made it clear to Lisa that if she did not help him, he would divorce her. Later, David gave Lisa a white powder and told her to put it in Jamie's food. Once she did, Jamie fell asleep and never woke up. Realizing what had happened, Lisa, in desperation, tried to win back her husband, but failed. In her despair, she ingested the same poison and gave it to her children. However, the poison did not have the expected effect on her, and she sought help from her neighbors to save herself from the horror that had befallen her children. Following her testimony, investigators launched a thorough investigation, but no evidence of David's involvement was found. No one close to the couple could have foreseen that Lisa Maria and David Acosta's lives would take such a tragic turn. When they met, Lisa was only 16 years old and still in high school, a dreamy and romantic girl, while David was a strong and determined young man. Their friendship quickly developed into strong feelings, leading to Lisa's unexpected pregnancy. Although their families disapproved of their relationship, David's parents supported their son and welcomed Lisa into their home. In difficult times, David's family provided genuine support to the young couple, even inviting Lisa to live with them to ensure she completed high school. When Lisa turned 18, the couple got married. 2 years later, they were expecting their second child, a daughter. David's parents decided to provide the young couple with their own home, giving them an apartment where they found a corner of family happiness. However, over time, their relationship began to deteriorate. Both spouses were unfaithful, leading to mistrust and disappointment. Their once boundless love began to weaken. Lisa also complained of psychological abuse from David, prompting her to seek help from the police. Eventually, she was granted a protective order, forcing David to leave the family home. At this point, Lisa began to blackmail David, demanding money for the chance to see their children. In early September 2020, Lisa's life took an unexpected turn when her eldest son began suffering from seizures. In desperation, she took him to the emergency room at Baca Ortiz Hospital. After stabilizing his condition, doctors conducted tests and diagnosed a focal form of epilepsy, a severe condition affecting a specific part of the brain. Doctors advised Lisa to undergo further tests, including MRIs, and to consult specialists urgently. However, Lisa ignored these recommendations. A month later, her son suffered another seizure, and they returned to the emergency room. Reviewing his medical history, doctors discovered Lisa had not followed their earlier advice, failed to complete tests, and had not seen specialists, leaving her son without necessary treatment. They warned her that continued neglect could lead to legal consequences. Despite the warnings, Lisa disregarded the medical advice. A few weeks later, after her son's condition resurfaced, she called David, who was alarmed by her serious tone. She informed him that a social worker would visit to discuss. To brighten the waiting time, Lisa offered him a drink. However, as David drank the drink, he suddenly felt unwell. His condition was worsening and the social worker had not shown up. So David decided to go home to get something to deal with his discomfort. The next morning, David woke up in a terrible state. He could barely speak because his tongue was numb. Every step caused discomfort and his eyes hurt. His parents insisted on calling an ambulance. David was taken to the hospital where he spent several days. Tests revealed the presence of a psychoactive substance in his system. But given that he hadn't used anything of the sort, David began to speculate how this could have happened. Eventually, he speculated that perhaps someone had deliberately slipped him some substance in a public place. David was grateful for his life and realized that what had happened could have ended much worse. In early October 2020, Lisa made the decision to hire a nanny for her children. Her cousin Patricia recommended her friend Bertha, a responsible 48-year-old woman looking for work. On Monday, October 5th, Bertha arrived at the young mother's house. Lisa urged her to take a pill that she said helped prevent infection with the COVID-19 virus, an epidemic of which was at its height at the time. Claiming that it was a highly effective natural remedy, Lisa convinced Bertha to swallow the medicine and enter the house. They sat down to discuss the babysitter's childcare duties. A few minutes later, Bertha began to feel sick. She felt a headache, her stomach began to upset, and eventually, she vomited. A short while later, Patricia showed up. It turned out that she had called her cousin repeatedly, but Lisa didn't answer, which alerted Patricia. She decided to check what had happened and immediately went to her house. Upon entering, she found Bertha lying on the couch, who was practically fainting already. Lisa shared with her cousin what had happened and expressed concern. Learning that Lisa still had not called an ambulance, Patricia immediately did so herself. After a while, doctors arrived and sent Bertha to the hospital. The condition of the victim managed to stabilize. Doctors diagnosed poisoning with a toxic substance, which often happens when using various medications. Doctors decided that Bertha did not tolerate some component of the composition of the pills from COVID-19. A few months before this tragic incident, in June of the same year, Lisa's former buddy, Mark Escanto, had died of poisoning. At the time, the cause of his death had gone unnoticed. But now, given all these strange circumstances, Mark's case required additional attention. Investigators scrutinized the deceased's home and found Lisa's fingerprints on the glasses used the night before Mark's death. This fact added new evidence to the investigation, pointing to Lisa's possible involvement in the incident. But suddenly, a new accusation was made against Lisa. Her own family made a shocking report to the police. It turns out that on September 2nd, the family had a family gathering where Lisa offered to let everyone taste a drink of her own making. 7 brothers and sisters of the young woman, as well as their parents, drank the unknown drink and immediately felt sick. Fortunately, no one died, but the 56-year-old mother suffered a stroke. Lisa's father claimed that while the relatives were seeking medical attention, his daughter stole $1,300 from the house. Now the investigation included not only crimes against the children and a former boyfriend, but also an incident that jeopardized the lives and health of her own family members. As it turned out, that wasn't all. Investigators encountered another strange event. In May of that year, Jose Luis Horazzo, a friend of Lisa's, was found dead in his home. A few days before, Jose had suddenly disappeared, and neighbors soon smelled a rotting odor, prompting them to contact the authorities. An examination of the body initially revealed nothing suspicious and was ruled a heart attack. But one of Jose's sisters suspected something strange and hid a bottle of alcohol found in the refrigerator. In addition, Jose's family noticed that some items were missing from the house. It turned out that Lisa and Jose were friends, and when the guy died, the alleged killer contacted his relatives by phone. With a distraught voice, she stated that Jose owed her a large sum of money and she had to contact the family to repay the debt. This cunning plan did not work. And a little later, Lisa called Jose's family again, changing her voice to conceal her identity. Identifying herself as Jose's friend, she claimed that she was pregnant by him and now had to apply for child support. Although Jose's family did not believe these stories, Lisa was not about to give up and made a third attempt to deceive them. She said she knew who was responsible for Jose's death and offered to meet to uncover the details. Had she not been arrested on charges of killing her own children in Jamie, the list of victims might have gotten longer. When the media reported the arrest of Lisa, who had poisoned 3 people, Jose's relatives understood. They immediately reported their suspicions to the authorities, and Jose's body was exhumed for forensic examination to determine the true cause of death. The relatives were not mistaken. Traces of poison were found in the remains of the deceased. On December 22, 2020, a hearing was held for Lisa Maria Kaisa for the murder of her 2 children, whose names and photos were classified, and for Jamie Ianchiguano. The trial was conducted virtually due to restrictions related to the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Lisa had been in contact from a social rehabilitation center. The prosecutor's statement said that Lisa gave her children a toxic mixture of insecticides and anti-epileptic drugs. In interrogations, she claimed that she had grown desperate and could not leave her children with her husband David, who did not care for the children. In fact, she admitted that she wished them dead. At the end of the hearing, the judge issued the defendant a court pass and ordered her remanded into custody pending trial. The children's trial next took place in 2021 at the Pichincha Provincial Court. The prosecutor presented a set of evidence to prove Lisa's guilt. Among them were statements by David, who revealed the content of messages the wife had received on the eve of the tragedy. In one of the messages, she claimed that she would take with her what belonged to her, referring to the children. She said she didn't know where her children and herself would go, heaven or hell. But now she felt as if she was in hell. Lisa added that she doesn't expect her husband to forgive her because she knows he hated her, and now he will hate her even more. David also spoke about his unstable relationship with his wife. At the hearing, the defendant's reconstructed testimony was presented, stating that she took 2 pills that day, called for help, and then passed out. According to the reconstruction conducted by the prosecutor's office, the daughter died while still in bed, and her older brother tried to take a few steps to call for help but fell and died. The conclusion of the forensic medical examination was extremely clear. The children died as a result of a premeditated crime. The deaths were the result of suffocation caused by pulmonary edema and intoxication caused by a mixture of epilepsy medication and other unspecified substances, presumably insecticides and disinfectant. The prosecution also charged Lisa with the death of Jamie Ianchiguano, whose body was found bricked up in the kitchen. The perpetrator was also suspected of attempting to kill David and members of her own family. The hearing raised the issue of Lisa's irresponsible attitude to her son's health after being diagnosed with localized epilepsy. The mother ignored instructions for further tests and follow-up examinations, and when the boy was hospitalized again, his condition was exacerbated by her own mother's negligence. Warnings from medical professionals did not change her attitude toward her son's treatment, leading to a threatened termination of her parental rights. Lisa's mental health investigations revealed her to be highly emotional and environmentally dependent. She sought constant attention and understanding from others and experienced severe anxiety when events did not unfold according to her plan. She also exhibited a tendency to self-harm. She attempted to say goodbye to her life at least 3 times, but was unsuccessful each time. Witnesses described her as insecure, attachment-seeking, exhibiting schizoid and erratic behavior. The findings of the psychological analysis also emphasized that on the day of the tragic events, Lisa acted with full awareness of her actions. After a long trial that lasted 10 months, Lisa Maria Kaisa was found guilty of the crime against her children. The Pichincha Provincial Court sentenced her to 34 years 8 months imprisonment. In addition to this, she was ordered to pay David a compensation of more than $20,000. It was noted in the press that Lisa remained calm throughout the proceedings and only showed emotion when her children were mentioned. The Jamie Ianchiguano murder case, which began in August 2021, appeared to be unfinished. New details were revealed during the court hearings. Lisa admitted giving her friend a white substance mixed with alcohol but claimed she got it from David. However, the investigation proved otherwise. According to a psychiatrist who interviewed Lisa, she did not want to take Jaim's life. She wanted to intimidate his family so she could then extort money. She did demand $8,000 as ransom. Experts called the plan disorganized, which ultimately led to the crime. In addition, forensic tests revealed that it wasn't that simple. Jaime was found to have poison in his system, and the cause of death was strangulation. The body was found with a shattered rib cage and wire around the neck. Lisa claimed that after her friend died, she decided to bury him under a back room and cement him in. The store owner's testimony confirmed that Lisa bought building materials during the days of Jamie's disappearance. After the parties' arguments, the prosecutor's office requested a new trial in April 2022. At that trial, an additional charge of extortion was filed. Lisa called Jamie's relatives, claiming he was being held by a group of gangsters, and demanded $8,000 for his release. The defense relied on the lack of conclusive evidence that Lisa was involved in Jaime's murder. Nevertheless, She was found guilty and received a 22-year prison sentence, as well as a sentence to pay $5,000 to the victim's mother. While Jamie's trial was underway, the investigation of Mark Escanto and Jose Luis Arrezo, Lisa's alleged victims, was nearing completion. Mark Escanto was 48 years old, and tests conducted after his death revealed traces of the same substance that Lisa had given to her children. In addition, Mark was found to have severe inflammation of the stomach. The family's lawyer claimed that Lisa met Mark, offered him a beer, and then put the poison in the drink. A glass with Lisa and Mark's fingerprints, as well as a swab containing the woman's DNA, was provided to authorities. Alleged motives for the murder included jealousy and money. It is also known that Lisa had asked Mark to help her financially, and there is evidence that he loaned her at least $120. Mark was Lisa's first known victim. The final outcome of this case, as well as that of Jose Luis Arrezo, remain unknown. They may not have been reported in the press, or the investigation may not yet have reached the stage of being formally charged and brought to trial. At the time of her brutal crimes, Lisa Maria was only 26 years old. Her high-profile criminal case has become one of the most horrific and disturbing in Ecuador's recent history. These crimes made her known throughout the country as Dona Venado. Lisa Maria Kess is recognized as a serial killer in Ecuador. Her victims have endured terrible suffering, and their relatives have suffered unbearable pain. The charges include 5 murders and 9 attempted murders. Under Ecuadorian law, the maximum sentence she could face is 40 years in prison. That means Alyssa could be released when she turns 70 years old. It is still unclear what motivated Dona Venado to commit such horrific acts. Was her act the result of resentment for not getting what she expected in life? Many speculate that the motive was money. And in David's case, Lisa acted out of a lust for revenge, which led to the tragedy with her children. The most horrific part of this story is not only the number of victims left in the path of Dona Venado, but also the fate of 2 innocent children who could not have guessed that their mother, who gave them life, would take it away so absurdly and cruelly. In 1980, 21-year-old Helen Prashinsky was a senior at Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts. She was an active member of the community there and served as the chair of the resident hall council. The only thing important enough to take her away from that community was her dream of becoming a journalist. Just after New Year's Day, she arrived in Colorado for an internship in the news department at KHOW Radio in Denver. She had an aunt and uncle who lived in Englewood, Colorado, and would be staying with her for the duration of her internship. On Wednesday, January 16th, Helen was just 2 weeks into her stay in Colorado. She left work that afternoon as usual and began her commute home. Her new routine was to take the bus from Denver to Englewood, getting on the bus at Colfax Avenue and Broadway in Denver, and getting off at the stop at Union Avenue and South Broadway in Englewood. She would walk from the bus stop to her aunt's home less than 2 miles away. Helen was responsible and punctual, so her aunt knew something was wrong when she failed to arrive at her home that evening. At 10:30 p.m., she called the Englewood Police Department to report Helen missing. They immediately began searching for her, concerned that her disappearance may have been tied to a series of sexual assaults that had occurred in the area. The following morning, a woman was driving past a remote field south of Englewood in an area of Douglas County that would soon become the planned suburb of Highlands Ranch. Her children were in the car with her and they were on their way to a meeting. One of the children told her that they saw someone lying in the field as they drove past it. A road grader operator was nearby, so the woman stopped and asked him to go into the field to see if her child was correct about someone being there. They were. The operator discovered Helen's body lying in the field. Helen was found nude from the waist down, and her autopsy would reveal that she had been sexually assaulted. Helen's hands had been bound behind her, and she had been stabbed in the back 9 times. Her lungs had both collapsed as a result of those injuries, and her cause of death was extensive blood loss. A witness reported seeing Helen get off the bus in Englewood sometime between 5:57 and 6:30 p.m., meaning that she was abducted by her killer during her walk home. Her autopsy estimated that she died sometime between 8 and 10 p.m. The Douglas County Sheriff's Office, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and volunteers from the Arapahoe County Search and Rescue Unit searched the area for clues that morning. They did not find anything, and the effort called off as snow began to fall. Investigators canvassed the area for more witnesses and used the media to ask for anyone with information to come forward. Their best lead was a witness who saw a man standing by a vehicle near the field where Helen was found at approximately 10:20 p.m. on January 16th. The witness was only able to provide a general description of the man, but after being put under hypnosis, she was able to provide a detailed composite sketch of the man she had seen. That image was circulated, and owners of the type of vehicle she had observed were investigated, but no arrests were made. Without new leads, the case went cold by the spring of 1981. Helen was posthumously awarded her degree, with honors, by Wheaton College on May 31, 1980. Helen's friends and family helped create a scholarship in Helen's memory which was awarded to a senior at the college. The school also awards the Helen Persinski Leadership Award to a senior dedicated to the Wheaton community, who has enriched the campus environment through contributions to student life and commitments to others, as Helen did during her time there. A major force in keeping Helen's case from being forgotten in the decades following her death was her high school choral group. As a student at Hamilton Wenham Regional High School in Massachusetts, Helen had been a member of school's singing group, Club Harmony. Other former members of the group have been actively maintaining the scholarship fund Helen's parents initially established in her memory. The scholarship is awarded to a senior at the school who has made a valuable contribution to a drama or musical production. In addition, 3 former members of the group, and Helen's former choir director, traveled to Colorado in 2006 with the goal of trying to move the case forward. They passed out flyers in the area near the bus stop where Helen was last seen and gave media interviews asking for witnesses to come forward. They were also able to meet with investigators from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation to inquire about using more advanced DNA technology to finally close the case. They remained involved with the investigation even after returning home, and Colorado detectives would later travel to Massachusetts to meet with them about Helen's case. The case had been reopened in 1998 by a task force with members from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and the Englewood Police Department with hopes that DNA testing would solve it. Semen had been found on Helen's coat and a DNA profile was developed from it. Unfortunately, when it was run through the FBI's DNA database, no matches were found. Later searches would also fail to identify a match to the DNA from the crime scene. Helen's case was re-examined again in 2013 when the Douglas County Sheriff's Office formed a cold case unit. The unit would look at the case occasionally over the next few years, but no new leads were found. In 2018, the case was revisited again, but this time investigators had a plan to use one of the newest investigative techniques available in the case. They now hoped that genetic genealogy could be a potential means of identifying a suspect. The process would require an exceptional amount of research, investigation, and problem solving. Dozens of investigators at the state, local, and federal level worked on the case over the course of the next year. The process of using genetic genealogy in the case began in late 2018 when Detective Jason Serbo of the Cold Case Unit at the Douglas County Sheriff's Office submitted the DNA profile from the crime scene to Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia. Parabon prepared the profile to be uploaded to GEDmatch, an open-source genetic genealogy site originally designed to help individuals locate distant relatives and construct family trees. The site also has an option that allows users to authorize law enforcement agencies to compare their DNA to samples from unsolved cases. If individuals who are even distantly related to the suspect provide this access, authorities can study their extended family trees to identify potential suspects based on the amount of DNA they share. Parabon's initial findings after running the crime scene DNA through GEDmatch found 2 individuals estimated to be 3 generations removed from Helen's killer based on the amount of DNA they had in common with him, as well as several other individuals who were more distantly related to him. Several of these individuals allowed Detective Serbo access to their family trees and personal genealogy research. Ultimately, Parabon and Detective Serbo came to the conclusion that Helen's killer was most likely the son of a woman named June Estes. They believed she had a total of 4 sons, but were only able to identify 2 of them. Those 2 sons had been 10 and 11 in 1980 and were therefore eliminated as suspects. Estes led a tumultuous life, using 6 different surnames over the course of her life and living in multiple states. This made trying to identify her other children very difficult. Investigators still tried to find them, but also continued investigating the possibility that the killer fit into the family tree they were constructing somewhere else. As more and more people uploaded their profiles to JetMatch, the authorities had more and more information to work with. One woman from Georgia, named Jessie, who is distantly related to the killer, has publicly detailed the process of being contacted by investigators and asked to assist in the genealogy research they were performing to identify Helen's killer. Jessie was an early listener of the Murder Squad, a podcast launched by investigative journalist Billy Jensen and retired cold case investigator Paul Holes in April of 2019. Jensen and Holes were both connected to the Golden State Killer case in which the suspect, Joseph James DeAngelo, was famously arrested decades after the last known crime thanks to genetic genealogy. Jensen helped complete Michelle McNamara's book on the case, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, after her sudden death in 2016, and Holes worked on the case for many years, retiring just prior to DeAngelo's arrest in April of 2018. Jensen and Holes are therefore vocal advocates of the use of genetic genealogy. They also hoped that their podcast could be used to teach their listeners ways to responsibly help solve cases. Since the beginning of the podcast, they have explained how individuals uploading their DNA profiles, obtained through commercial DNA services like Ancestry.com or 23andMe for personal use, to databases such as GeneMatch, and making them available for comparison to law enforcement, could potentially provide important leads in unsolved cases. Jessie had previously had her DNA analyzed through 23andMe. After hearing Jensen and Holes explain how she could make her DNA available for investigators to compare it to samples from cold cases, she decided to submit her DNA profile to GeneMatch and uploaded it to the database in April of 2019. In early June of 2019, Jessie received an email from Detective Serbo. He told her that he was working on a cold case from 1980 when he ran DNA found at the crime scene through GeneMatch. Jessie's profile came up as one of the very partial matches. He estimated that Jessie and Helen's killer were third cousins. GeneMatch does not make an individual's full DNA profile available to law enforcement. They also only make available the information users choose to share. When someone uploads their DNA profile to the database, they can opt to use their legal name or make a username. Detective Serbo was able to get in contact with Jessie through the email address she provided, but he did not have much other information about her. He would need her to provide him with details about her so that he could study her extended family and see exactly where it overlapped with the other individuals the unit had identified. While Jessie had submitted her DNA to JetMatch because she knew it could potentially help in a criminal case, she did not expect anything to ever come of her decision and was surprised when she received this email. Before responding, she used the limited amount of information she had been given to try to determine if such a case actually existed to verify that the email was genuine. Researching cold cases in Colorado from 1980, she came across Helene's case and determined that it was most likely the case Detective Servo was investigating. Jessie enlisted the help of a friend to compile her family tree to provide to Detective Serbo. In addition, she had both of her parents, who had also previously used commercial DNA services, upload their profiles to GeneMatch. This allowed investigators to determine that Jessie was related to the suspect through her father's side of the family. Detective Serbo left the sheriff's office to become a senior criminal investigator for the Denver District Attorney's Office in July of 2019. The task of investigating the vast amount of information being gathered from GeneMatch users then went largely to Detective Shannon Jensen. In addition to Parbon Nanolabs, Detective Jensen also worked closely with a Colorado-based company, United Data Connect. She was able to fund this additional genetic genealogy work thanks to funding from Metro Denver Crime Stoppers. Helping Detective Jensen with the investigation was Joan Hanlon, a professional genealogist working for United Data Connect. Detective Jensen had recently hit a dead end with a potential suspect in Arizona, but Ms. Hanlon provided new ideas to keep the investigation moving forward. She helped Detective Jensen identify key family members of individuals who were already cooperating in the investigation, who should have their DNA tested, and began researching different descendant lines. Over several months, other distant relatives were identified and contacted, and certain descendant lines were eliminated from consideration. The work was tedious, but ultimately provided the information needed to finally close Helene's case. Instead of identifying a new potential suspect, Ms. Helen's new efforts ultimately brought Detective Jensen back to the original theory genetic genealogy had generated in the case. Thanks to Ms. Helen's work, Detective Jensen located a family member who could finally tell her about the two unidentified sons of June Estes. This family member revealed that after June had suffered a nervous breakdown, her husband, William White, had taken her boys away from her. He eventually sent them to live with their Uncle Fred. The boys were named William and Curtis White, and the relative was able to provide details like where they had been born and places they had lived. This information allowed Detective Jensen to finally identify the previously unknown sons of June Estes and investigate them as potential suspects. One of the brothers, William White Jr., had an extensive criminal record. Detective Jensen learned that his DNA had been entered into the combined DNA index system in 2010. Since the sample from Helen's coat had been run through that database after 2010 and had not matched to William White, she knew that he was not her suspect. However, she still had his DNA compared to that from the crime scene. In November of 2019, it was confirmed that William White was not the suspect she was looking for. The YSTR analysis, a type of analysis specific to the Y chromosome carried by males, revealed that William and Helen's killer came from the same paternal lineage. The investigation was on the right track. June's other son with William White Sr. had been born Curtis Allen White, but he was using the name James Curtis Clanton by 2019. In 1975, while living under another alias, Curtis White had raped a woman at knife point in Arkansas after gaining entry into her home by asking to use her telephone. He pleaded guilty to first-degree rape and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. However, he would only serve a fraction of that sentence. After stealing a car while trying to run away from home as a teenager, Wade had been sent to live at the Southern Christian Home, a children's home in Arkansas. After he was sent to prison in 1975, one of his former from the home got in contact with him and offered to help him get back on his feet. The counselor was now living in Douglas County, Colorado, and offered to let Wade come live with him, his wife, and 5 children. He also promised to help him get a job. This offer played a major role at White's parole hearing in early 1979. "I want to be paroled because I have people that care about me now and I have adjusted myself," White said at the hearing. Having a support system in the form of a counselor apparently made White a good candidate for parole, and he was released from prison on March 6, 1979 after serving only 4 years of a 30-year sentence. His parole agreement allowed him to move to Colorado to live with his former counselor and assigned him to a parole officer there. White did live with the counselor and his family for a year as he had assured the court and worked at the landscaping job the counselor had secured for him. This placed him in the area at the time of Helen's murder. White would later move to Englewood and work for a backing company, but he moved backing with the counselor and his family after just a few months. By 1982, he had moved to Florida and changed his name to James Curtis Clanton. He would be married and divorced twice over the years, with the first marriage lasting only 30 days. In 1998, he was arrested for domestic battery in Palm Beach County. His mugshot from this arrest would be the first image investigators in Colorado would see of him. It bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketch of the suspect developed back in 1980. While Clanton's criminal history, resemblance to the sketch, and place within the family tree investigators had constructed made him look like a promising suspect, these details by no means proved that he killed Helen. In order to eliminate or confirm him as the suspect, investigators would need to test his DNA, which was not in any database. They therefore began the process of trying to surreptitiously collect a DNA sample from him to test against the DNA from the crime scene. Detectives Tim Vinnett and Troy Crosswaite of the Douglas County Sheriff's Office were assigned to try to get a sample from Clanton. They spent the week of Thanksgiving, 2019, surveilling Clanton, following him around Lake Butler, Florida, where the 62-year-old was living and working as a truck driver. Their first attempt to get a sample of his DNA from a discarded milk carton was unsuccessful, so their surveillance continued. On November 30th, they followed Clanton into a bar called the Full House Lounge just before noon. They watched him drink several beers, pouring each bottle into a mug. After Clanton left the establishment, the detectives collected the beer mug from the bartender. It was sent back to Colorado for analysis. The DNA found on the mug was a match the DNA found at Helen's crime scene. On December 11, 2019, a little more than a month shy of the 40th anniversary of Helen's murder, James Curtis Clanton parked his truck near his home as was his routine. As he walked away from it, he was arrested. With the assistance of the Union County Sheriff's Office, Clanton was taken into custody without incident and extradited back to Colorado. Clanton was being charged with first-degree murder and second-degree kidnapping. He could not be charged with sexual assault because the statute of limitations for that crime had expired. Authorities have so far not connected Clanton to the other sexual assaults committed in the area around the time of Helen's murder. Clanton's arrest was announced at a press conference on December 16, 2019, the same day he appeared in court to be formally advised of the charges against him. Investigators and District Attorney George Brauchler were prepared to take the case to trial. However, at a court hearing on February 21, 2020, Clanton pleaded guilty to the charges against him. This plea to these specific charges requires that he be sentenced to life in prison. However, because of the statutes in place in 1980, when the crime was committed, he would be able to apply for parole after serving 20 years in prison. As he would be 82 years old at that time, he may not live long enough to even have the opportunity to make such an application. Helen's friends and family are extremely grateful for the work of all the investigators and the tenacity they showed by not giving up on solving Helen's case. Unfortunately, the passage of time between Helen's murder and the arrest of her killer meant that many of her loved ones did not get to see the case solved. In addition to her beloved grandmother, Julia, all of Helen's immediate family, save for her older sister, Janet Johnson, passed away before Clanton's arrest. Her brother Chet passed away in 2009 at the age of 63, and her parents, Henrietta and Chester, passed away within 3 months of each other in 2012. Janet Johnson wants the focus of this case to remain on Helen and her memory. In a statement she released through the Douglas County Sheriff's Office, she described her younger sister as her best friend and a loving relative to her entire family. Etching up and killed, Helen would have gone on to do great things. "There has not been a day that goes by that we haven't missed her," Johnson said in the statement. "The detectives and everyone else who helped make this day happen are my heroes." The case of Nancy Paula Reyes Gorses. What led to the crime against the pregnant woman and what became of the child? The quest for personal happiness and a better life can be long, fraught with difficulties, and doesn't always yield the desired outcome. Many people are drawn to other countries or even the other side of the world in these pursuits. But sometimes, instead of finding the expected happiness, they encounter only pain, deep disillusionment, or even death. In the pursuit of dreams and overarching goals, it is crucial to remain aware of the people around us. The story of a young Guatemalan woman named Nancy Paula Reyes Gorses has become one of the most resonant cases in Spain in recent years. The mother of two left Central America to cross the ocean in search of employment that could provide her daughters with a decent life and assist her elderly parents. However, the woman never returned home. Fragments of her disfigured and unrecognizable body were found with difficulty in desolate and nearly impassable areas. At the time of her crime, she was 4 months pregnant, and the perpetrator was someone Gorges had hoped to share her life with. Challenging life in Guatemala. Little is known about the early years of the woman named Nancy Paula Reyes Gorges. She was born on April 13, 1991 in a small village named Granados in the Republic of Guatemala. Nancy was the second of 5 children in a very poor family. Her parents, Jorge and Prudencia Gorses, struggled to make ends meet. Despite this, they did everything possible to ensure their children received a good education and could live better than they did. After finishing school, Nancy was able to enroll at the university in the city of Villanueva, where she studied business administration and document management. She was a diligent student and graduated with honors. However, despite her academic achievements, significant career prospects did not follow. She worked as a cashier in a large supermarket during her studies and later was promoted to administrator, but her career progression stalled there. During her university years, Nancy lived in an unregistered marriage with a young man whose name is not mentioned in public records, with whom she had 2 daughters. Unfortunately, this relationship did not lead to a long-term commitment, and the couple separated. The father of the girls subsequently lost interest in the fate of his children and did not provide any financial support. Decision to relocate. Nancy continued to live in her parents' house, now with her own daughters, working at the supermarket and seeing no future prospects. The family barely had enough money for essentials, and something had to change. In 2013, Nancy's older sister immigrated to the United States, where she soon found a good job, married successfully, and settled well. Inspired by her sister, Nancy decided to radically change her life too, but she chose to relocate to Europe, settling on sunny Spain. At that time, she didn't even have enough money to buy a one-way plane ticket, let alone funds needed for initial expenses. For several years, Gursais worked diligently, saving enough money to finally make her dream come true in the summer of 2018. In July, she bought a ticket to Madrid and promised her parents that she would keep in constant contact so they wouldn't worry about her. She planned to find housing and a job upon arrival. She carried a few 1,000 euros, enough to rent a room, cover food, and the most necessary items until she could secure a steady income. At the time of her departure, Nancy was 27 years old, and her daughters, who stayed with their grandparents in Guatemala, were 5 years old. Nancy didn't stay long in Madrid. After living in Barcelona for some time, she moved to the city of Ciudad Real, the center of the Spanish province of the same name. She called home almost daily, asking about her family's well-being, and she regularly sent money home, which increasingly helped her parents not only fully support themselves and her daughters, but also to renovate their old house. Nancy mentioned she didn't have an official stable job and was making ends meet through odd jobs, like cleaning in affluent homes or caring for the elderly and sick. Nancy never complained about the hardships. On the contrary, she told her family that Europe offered more opportunities, and she could never have earned as much back home, even working around the clock with no days off. It seemed she was completely satisfied with how her life was unfolding, and even spoke of eventually bringing her daughters to Spain once she saved enough to rent a spacious and comfortable home for the whole family. Fateful romance. For a while, Nancy didn't share much about her personal life, claiming she simply had no time due to work. But in the spring of 2020, she admitted to her parents that she had met a man with whom she had started a romantic relationship. His name was Carlos Andres Bustamante, and they had met by chance while Gursais was looking for new rental housing. As they resolved this issue, the couple grew closer and eventually started living together. Carlos was a year older than his beloved and, at the start of their relationship, did not have a steady income, surviving on random small jobs. In fact, Nancy was the main breadwinner in their relationship. She paid for housing and bills and often gave Carlos money for his personal needs and expenses. However, she never complained to her family about this, so her parents were confident that everything was fine, and their daughter had met a good man with whom she lived in love, harmony, and abundance. By that time, Nancy's 2 younger brothers had also moved to Spain, with whom she kept in touch. She was particularly close to Dennis, the youngest brother, who had even met Carlos personally and found him likable. At the end of June 20th, Nancy and Carlos decided to move to the resort city of Santander, located on the Atlantic coast. In a phone conversation with her family, Nancy mentioned that the climate was warmer and better there, and she saw more job prospects. However, at that time, certain difficulties began to appear in her relationship with Carlos, which he tried not to discuss with anyone. Bustamante turned out to be jealous, temperamental, and quite cruel. Moreover, he lacked any career ambitions and was completely satisfied being supported by a woman. Most alarmingly, he abused alcohol and occasionally indulged in forbidden substances, although he constantly tearfully promised to quit and find Carlos was thrilled by this news and swore that from now on, their life would change for the better. But in reality, things only got worse. He continued to drink and use drugs, taking money from his civil wife or asking his mother for it. Moreover, he began to physically abuse Nancy, something she tried to keep from everyone. Alarming signals. On the evening of August 12th, while Nancy was video chatting with her parents, they suddenly heard Carlos loudly shouting and berating their daughter, demanding to know who she was talking to. He didn't believe her when she said she was speaking with her mother and snatched the phone from her hands. After verifying the truth by looking at the screen, he simply threw the device onto a chair and walked away. The next day, the situation repeated itself. Carlos again grabbed the phone from Nancy's hands while she was talking to her parents and daughters. He demanded to see who she was speaking with, insulted her, and even threatened harm. A frightened Nancy later explained to her relatives that her partner was just overly jealous and tried to reassure them that everything was fine. Her parents, however, tried to persuade her to contact the police, but she insisted that she could handle the situation herself. However, on August 17th, during a candid phone conversation with her sister, Cortez ominously stated that if anything happened to her or if she suddenly died, Carlos would be solely to blame. Her words were chilling, but she did not elaborate further, only asking her sister to take care of her children if needed. This was the last time her sister heard Nancy's voice. Mysterious disappearance of the pregnant woman. On August 20th, around 2 in the afternoon, Nancy sent a text message to her father, promising to call later that evening, but she never did, nor the next day, which was unusual for her. She also did not respond to calls from her family, prompting them to try contacting Carlos, but he did not answer his phone either. Since the couple had recently moved to Santander and had no friends there, and Nancy's brothers were on the other side of the country and couldn't quickly arrive to check on her, the situation was alarming. A few days later, a strange message came from Carlos' phone stating that he and Nancy had argued and decided to split up. Allegedly, she had packed her things and left in search of a separate apartment, was ignoring his calls, and he had no idea where she might be. Her brothers then suggested that Carlos should immediately come to Ciudad Real so they could go to the police together and file a missing person report. Carlos readily agreed, but as expected, he never showed up, did not file the report. And on top of everything else, he too stopped communicating with the Gorse family. Mother knew everything. The relatives of the missing woman themselves contacted the police to report her disappearance. Meanwhile, through Nancy's friends, her brothers found the address of Sandra Bustamante, Carlos' mother. When they visited her, introduced themselves, and explained the situation, she unexpectedly broke down in tears, confessing that she had suspected her son could do something terrible to his partner, but she did not elaborate on the details. Sandra also had no idea where her son and future daughter-in-law were. Carlos wasn't answering her calls, but only sent brief messages asking her not to ask questions and to give him some time. She liked Nancy, but knew her son too well and understood what he was capable of. The next day, Sandra was called in for questioning at the police station. Law enforcement wanted to discuss the disappearance of her would-be daughter-in-law and to find out the possible whereabouts officers what she had already told the girls' brothers the day before and showed them a lengthy text message that Nancy had sent her a couple of days before she vanished. In the message, Nancy pleaded with Sandra never to give her son money regardless of the tearful stories he might concoct. According to Gorses, he would spend it all on alcohol and banned substances under the influence of which he became very aggressive and cruel. He had no desire to find a job or battle his addictions, and his behavior became increasingly threatening, prompting the pregnant woman to consider leaving him. She ended her message by saying it was better to end things now before anyone got hurt. Another disturbing detail also came to light. It turned out that Carlos had several prior convictions for causing bodily harm, and one of his first victims had been his own mother, whom he had brutally beaten when he was just a 17-year-old teenager. At that time, he had gotten off with probation, but later, after leaving his family home, he had served short terms for assaulting women with whom he lived and tried to form relationships. The oldest profession. The investigation was just beginning, but in the first few days, many curious details emerged that indicated this union was doomed from the start. In addition to Carlos being an aggressive, unemployed drug addict with a criminal record and suffering from uncontrollable bouts of rage, friends of Nancy revealed something interesting about her as well. It turned out that the woman was not merely a housekeeper or caregiver, as she had told her parents, because cleaning houses and caring for the elderly would never have brought in as much money as she was sending home every month. The slender, dark-haired Guatemalan with a striking appearance provided escort services to wealthy Spaniards and visitors alike. Indeed, her work was connected to the odd and sudden move to the resort port city of Santander, where she had more opportunities to earn. Carlos knew about his beloved's occupation, and initially, He was fine with it since she fully supported them both, eliminating the need for him to find work himself. However, when she became pregnant, he began to lose his mind. Firstly, he was tormented by doubts about whether he was the father of the child, suspecting it might be one of Nancy's clients. Secondly, she continued to work even in her condition, and Bustamante was insanely jealous. He alternated between forbidding her to meet and talk with other men and forcing her to work when they ran out of money to live on. The money that the man took from his mother, he spent exclusively on himself and his vices. Horrific discoveries. In a rented apartment for nearly a week, there had been no known whereabouts of Nancy and Carlos. Carlos had been in touch, but only responded with messages and never disclosed his location. Surprisingly, it wasn't until August 26th that police finally obtained a warrant to search the couple's vacant rental apartment in Santander. What they found there was truly shocking and left no doubt that Nancy was no longer alive. Blood traces were found virtually everywhere in the apartment. Some attempts had been made to clean them up, but for the most part, they were visible even to the naked eye. In the clogged drains of the bathroom and toilet, fragments of bones, hair, as well as pieces of skin and internal organs were discovered. Forensic analysis confirmed that all belonged to the missing woman, although her remains were not found in the apartment. The crime scene suggested that Nancy had been brutally ended, dismembered in the bathroom, and her remains disposed of elsewhere. Carlos immediately became the prime suspect in the case. He remained unreachable, and his whereabouts were unknown. Also found in the apartment was a package from a small hatchet purchased at a local hardware store. The tool itself was not found, but Carlos Bustamante's clear fingerprints were on the package. Security footage from that store showed that on August 20th, Carlos bought the hatchet, a pair of sturdy rubber gloves, and large trash bags. At a market near their home, he purchased a small cart from an elderly vendor who immediately recognized the suspect from a photo shown to him. Arrest and search for the body. The day after the grim in the apartment, an unsuspecting Carlos unexpectedly turned himself in at a police station in Madrid. Trying to deflect suspicion from himself, he went to report Nancy missing, but was immediately arrested as the main suspect in the gruesome crime. Carlos claimed he had nothing to do with what happened, stating they had argued and parted ways on August 20th. He said he left town in a fit of emotion and was unaware of any subsequent events involving Nancy. He suggested that someone might have attacked her when she returned to the apartment to gather her belongings. Carlos' version sounded far-fetched, especially after police found his fingerprints on the hatchet's packaging. In the following days, nearby wastelands, sewer systems, and the coastline were thoroughly searched with the help of divers, but no trace of Nancy was found. The police then decided to track all of Carlos' movements from August 20th to 26th using his mobile phone signals. It turned out he had spent 3 days traveling along the coast and had also visited the cities of Bilbao and Burgos before heading to Madrid. It was clear that Carlos was trying to cover his tracks, but it seemed unlikely that he would travel around the country with a dismembered body, leading authorities to continue their search in Santander. Street surveillance footage showed that on the evening of August 20th, he walked toward a large natural forest park. He returned to the apartment late at night and then went out again, this time with a cart filled with oddly shaped bags. There were few cameras in the park itself, so once Carlos entered the wooded area, he disappeared and later reappeared with the same cart, which was now much lighter. He then headed toward the railway tracks, beyond which was a steep cliff overgrown with bushes. From there, he returned much lighter, giving law enforcement a clear indication of where to look for the body. Where is the child? It wasn't until September 16th that bags containing highly decomposed human remains were found in thick underbrush on the hillside. These remains were identified as those of the missing Nancy Gorsuch, divided into 20 parts with a hatchet. According to security camera footage, everything Carlos transported in the cart was recovered, but something was still missing. Nancy, as we recall, was 4 months pregnant, yet her fetus was not found in any of the bags. The condition of the victim's genitals and lower abdomen showed merciless mutilation with a knife and hatchet, indicating that the perpetrator likely extracted the fetus and disposed of it separately from the mother's body. Carlos consistently denied his involvement, gave conflicting statements, and continued to try to shift the blame onto an unknown assailant. However, traces of the victim's blood were found on his clothing and shoes, which he attempted but failed to completely wash off. Despite Bustamante's refusal to admit guilt, investigators were able to piece together the chain of tragic events and the full scenario of the crime. Forensic experts believe that on the afternoon of August 20th, following an argument, the man brutally beat and strangled his pregnant partner in the kitchen where traces of blood were found on the floor and walls. Carlos then moved Nancy's body to the bathroom and went shopping at a hardware store and the market. In the bathroom, he divided Nancy's body into 20 parts using a hatchet and a large kitchen knife, placed the pieces into bags, and loaded everything into a cart. He then went to the park looking for secluded places to dispose of the body. Late at night, he left the apartment with the cart and followed a pre-planned route deep into the park, scattering the bags in various locations, hoping they would never be found. Trial and sentence. The whereabouts of the fetus Carlos removed from Nancy's body remain unknown. He denied his guilt and claimed he loved her. From the time of the gruesome crime until his arrest in Madrid, Bustamante lived off the money he stole from Gorsi's, which he spent daily in bars across various cities. The investigation, the search for evidence and witnesses took law enforcement nearly 2 years, and the trial of the murderer did not begin until July 2022. In November of the same year, Carlos was found guilty of the premeditated brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many considered the sentence handed down to the murderer to be too lenient. Bustamante was sentenced to 25.5 years in prison, and he was also ordered to pay financial compensation of 150,000 euros to the parents and daughters of the deceased woman. On Friday, May 24, 1957, Emmanuel Akinyemi was working as a foreman at the Gloucester Road Underground station in London. His duties included taking tickets and operating the lift. At 10:20 p.m., he heard someone running up the emergency staircase. If someone were fast enough, they could reach the top before the lift returned to the street level, thus avoiding the fare and the lift attendant. Then, Emmanuel heard a woman yell, "Bandit! Bandit!" He had just brought the lift down to the eastbound platform and noticed a tall, white-haired woman slowly stumbling toward the lift, clutching her chest. When he asked her about the bandits, she responded, "I have been knifed." It was then that Emmanuel noticed the blood seeping through the woman's jacket on her left side. Quickly, he helped her into the lift and began bringing her back up to street level. He asked her where the bandit was, and she told him she didn't know. Authorities later concluded that the person Emmanuel had heard on the staircase was likely the culprit making his escape. By this point, the woman was too weak from blood loss to say much more. Once the lift reached the street level, Emmanuel left the woman with the station inspector and ran to a nearby public phone to call for help. Police Constable Ron Sherfield of the Metropolitan Police was passing by the station and was called in to assist. He stayed with the woman as she was transported to St. Mary Abbott's Hospital, and she spoke her final labored words to him. "I was on the platform, then stabbed." The woman passed away not long after she arrived at St. Mary Abbott's just after midnight on May 25th. The woman was 73-year-old Countess Teresa Lubenska. The native of Poland had been living in London since the end of the Second World War. She had spent the night of May 24th having dinner with friends at their home in Florence Road, Ealing. She had left the gathering with Father Krasnowski, a Polish priest. They boarded the Piccadilly line at Ealing Common and rode together until Father Krasnowski disembarked at Earl's Court. The Countess had remained on the train until it reached the next station, Gloucester Road. A post-mortem examination revealed that the Countess had been stabbed 5 times by her killer. 2 of the wounds had pierced her heart. The other 3 wounds were in her chest, stomach, and back. The weapon used was a very small knife, no more than 2 inches long. The Countess had been born Teresa Skarczynska on April 18, 1884 in southeastern Poland. She came from a noble family and was educated at a prestigious all-girls Catholic boarding school in Ukraine. She acquired her title upon her marriage to Count Edward Lubenski in 1902. Following her marriage, she went to live on her husband's family estate in Lezo and became an active member of the Polish Red Cross. She and her husband had 2 children, a son, Stanislav, born in 1906, and a daughter, Isabella, born in 1910. During the political upheaval that followed the 1918 Bolshevik Revolution, Count Lubenska was stabbed to death and the family estate was seized. The Countess and her children then fled to Warsaw. Her son Stanislav chose to go into the military and graduated from Cavalry Officer Cadet School in 1928, ranked second in his class of 50 cadets. He rose to the rank of captain in 1936 and was killed in September of 1939 as he fought during the German invasion of Poland. Perhaps as a way to cope with her grief, Countess Lubenska became an active member of the Polish resistance against the Nazis and German occupation. She helped find aid for civilians suffering under the occupation, and her apartment was one of the earliest places where the secret meetings of the Polish resistance were held. In 1942, she was reported to Nazi officials who searched her apartment and found the escaped prisoners she had been hiding there. The Countess was arrested and sent to Pajak prison for her initial interrogation. From there, she was sent to Auschwitz where her prisoner number for 4747 was tattooed on her arm. She was then sent on to Ravensbrück, where she was sentenced to death. Her sentence was commuted at the last minute due to the intervention of the Swedish Red Cross. Countess Lubenska would remain at Ravensbrück as a political prisoner for over 2 years, during which time she was tortured and became gravely ill. Despite all this, she remained serene and strong according to those held with her. Instead of focusing on her own suffering, she instead tried to help her fellow prisoners, to whom she showed great kindness. She earned the nickname the White Angel during her time in the camp for her efforts. The Countess was able to survive in the camp until she was finally released and then fled to London where she was eventually reunited with her daughter. She lived modestly in a 1-room flat in Cornwall Gardens, Kensington, and dedicated her life to helping other displaced persons and concentration camp survivors. She founded and was the chair of the London Association of Polish Ex-Political Prisoners in Germany. Her work over the years following the war had put her in contact with more than 1,000 fellow Poles now living in England and 5,000 Poles scattered throughout the rest of the United Kingdom and Europe. Following the Countess's death, the General Secretary of the Federation of Polish Exiles in London, Mr. T. Hesiak, said, "This is a great shock and loss to the Polish in London." The Countess was very well known and very well esteemed throughout Poland and by every Pole in this country. She was a woman of much bravery, very religious, and always the champion of the poor. On Sunday, May 26th, more than 1,000 Polish exiles attended Mass at Brompton Oratory, where special prayers were offered for the Countess, described by the officiating priest as a devout and brave daughter of Poland. Following the Mass, then 300 people remained in a private chapel, lighting candles before an image of Our Lady of Czestochowa and kneeling in prayer until early evening on behalf of the Countess and her memory. The Countess's political and social activism was, of course, immediately considered as a potential motive in her murder. Her daughter Isabella was convinced that the crime had a political motive. It is possible that her killer could have held extreme political views and disagreed with the Countess's opposition to the Nazi Party or her work on behalf of displaced persons. A popular theory in the Polish community at the time was that Countess Lubenska had been murdered by a Soviet agent or by a treacherous member of the Polish community now working for the Soviets. However, the small knife used in the murder seemed like an improvised weapon, and the well-lit platform full of witnesses was an unlikely location for a planned assassination. A more popular theory early on in the investigation held that the Countess had run this theoretical person may have felt it necessary to kill the Countess on the spot to prevent her from exposing their secret. Supporting this theory was the fact that the Countess had a remarkable ability to remember faces. She could remember people with ease, even though she knew so many people as a result of her work. Countess Lubenska's activism and ties to the war, of course, may also have been purely coincidental, and she may have been the victim of a random crime, such as robbery. There was no indication that someone had tried to grab her handbag, but she could have been killed by a panicked thief following a botched attempt to steal from her. Those who knew the Countess believed that she would have fought back against anyone trying to rob her. The Countess's repeated use of the term bandit following her attack would seem to support this theory. A bandit is generally defined as someone who steals or plunders. However, the Countess was known to use the term outside of its widely accepted definition. Speaking at the inquest into the Countess's death, one of her family members, Adam Anthony Belinsky, testified that she used to say that word very often, describing some hooligans. "I remember it very well. Speaking about some people who are drinking too much, making a noise, she used it very often." This ties into another possible motive in the case. While Countess Lubenska was a champion of the poor and lived modestly after the war, her younger years as a member of a noble family still influenced some of her views. She had very strong opinions about proper behavior and was not afraid to voice them. She disapproved of rowdiness, vulgarity, and drunkenness and expected others to behave with the same sense of propriety she did. According to a station porter, there had been a group of young people at horseplay on the platform shortly before the Countess arrived there. She may have reprimanded them for what she considered misbehavior and been killed in a subsequent argument. Police were never able to determine the motive in the murder because they were never able to identify the killer. This was not due to a lack of effort, however. The exact train the Countess had been on was identified and the time of her arrival at the station was placed at exactly 10:19 p.m. The driver and guard on the train were interviewed, but could not provide any useful information. More than 200 trains on the Piccadilly line were examined. Dozens of police officers searched the various sections of the station, as well as the surrounding tunnels, thinking that the murder weapon may have been discarded. It was never found, despite the fact that for several months any knife found anywhere along the underground was turned over to the police for examination. Photographers and fingerprint experts were on the scene quickly after the murder and worked alongside police officers throughout the night. The only blood evidence left at the scene was in and near the left, so the exact location in the station where the Countess was stabbed could not be identified. Police were able to determine that 17 people had left the station around the time the Countess was killed, but had trouble tracking them down. They identified 2 individuals in particular they believed may have witnessed the crime as they were seen running from the platform shortly after the Countess was stabbed. One of them was a smartly dressed woman wearing a black coat and red high-heeled shoes. She was carrying a black handbag, had black hair, and was around 20 years of age. The other potential witness was a fair-haired man with a medium build, estimated to be 27 years old. He was clean-shaven and approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall. Neither of these witnesses came forward, and no one could identify them to police. The police therefore began going door to door in the area looking for people who had been at or near the station that night. More than 2,000 homes were visited as a part of this effort. In the 3 months following the murder, more than 18,000 people, living locally and abroad, were interviewed in connection to the case. Despite this extensive effort, no arrests were ever made in the case. The formal inquest into Countess Lubenska's death was held on August 19, 1957. The jury returned a verdict of murder by person or persons unknown. More than 60 years later, the identity of that person or persons still remains unknown. Funeral services were held for Countess Lubenska on June 1, 1957, at Brompton Oratory, and she was buried at Brompton Cemetery. The Polish government in exile posthumously awarded her the Golden Cross of Merit with Swords, an award given for wartime acts of valor and bravery under perilous circumstances, but not during combat. While Countess Lubenska's legacy has lived on in the community she so loved, so has the mystery of who ended her extraordinary life. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.